There is a war raging inside of you. It is not one that you can see, nor is it one that others will warn you about. It is subtle, insidious, and often goes unnoticed until it has already done its damage. This enemy does not come from the outside world. It is not your critics, your obstacles, or even your failures. The enemy is within. It is your ego. And until you recognize it as the greatest barrier between you and true mastery over your mind, it will continue to sabotage your growth, your happiness, and your ability to live a life free of unnecessary suffering. The Stoics understood this. They saw ego for what it truly is, a false image of self-importance that blinds us to the truth. It is a mask we wear, covering our insecurities and fears, leading us down a path of arrogance, entitlement, and self-delusion. But the good news is this: you can destroy your ego. You can strip away the illusions and take control of your mind. The moment you recognize the damage that an unchecked ego does to you and those around you, you will begin your journey toward wisdom, emotional control, and true power over yourself. This is not just a lesson in philosophy. This is a blueprint for reclaiming control of your emotions, your thoughts, and your very sense of self. This is how you destroy your ego and take command of your mind. Chapter 1. The Illusion of the Ego. The ego is a master illusionist. It convinces us that we are more important than we really are. It whispers to us that we deserve more, that we are always right, that our failures are someone else's fault. It seeks to protect itself at all costs, even when the truth is staring us in the face. It thrives on our deepest insecurities, feeding us narratives that justify our worst tendencies. Ego is the force that convinces us that we are above learning, that admitting mistakes is a weakness, and that we must always be right. This is why it is so dangerous. It is self-preserving, always justifying its existence at the cost of our own self-awareness. The Stoics warned against this illusion. Marcus Aurelius, the great philosopher, wrote in his Meditations, "Just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter. Cold or warm, tired or well-rested, despised or honored, dying or busy with other assignments." What is he saying? That our ego wants us to obsess over external validation, over how we are perceived, over our comforts and complaints. But these things do not matter. The only thing that matters is doing what is right, in every moment. If we allow ego to dictate our actions, we spend our lives chasing illusions rather than embracing the clarity of reality. We fall into the trap of measuring ourselves by the opinions of others rather than by the depth of our character. We risk becoming prisoners of self-delusion, constantly seeking applause and approval rather than truth and wisdom. The consequences of an unchecked ego are devastating. It isolates us from genuine relationships, distorts our perception of ourselves, and locks us into an endless battle against reality. Ego refuses to admit that we are flawed, that we need growth, that we must embrace discomfort to improve. And so it builds walls, walls of pride, walls of excuses, walls of defensiveness. These barriers prevent us from learning, from connecting deeply with others, and from experiencing true peace. The more we feed the ego, the more it demands, an insatiable beast that consumes our humility, our curiosity, and our potential. It turns our strengths into weaknesses, making us blind to our own shortcomings and resistant to growth. It creates a fragile self-image that crumbles at the slightest challenge, making us defensive, insecure, and unwilling to accept the truth. The greater the ego, the greater the fall. To destroy the illusion of the ego, we must first recognize it for what it is. We must understand that ego is nothing more than a collection of falsehoods we tell ourselves. It is a parasite on our minds, distorting our perception of reality, clouding our judgment, and turning us into prisoners of our own arrogance. It makes us defensive when confronted with uncomfortable truths, blinds us to our own faults, and keeps us from seeking wisdom from those who have walked before us. It convinces us that we are infallible, that we do not need to listen, that our perspective is the only one that matters. And so, we stagnate. We stop evolving. Our egos trap us in a version of ourselves that is neither true nor strong. The weight of ego is an invisible chain that shackles us to a false reality, reinforcing narratives that keep us from facing our true nature. We live within these narratives, afraid to shatter them for fear of what lies beyond, a self that is stripped of illusions, forced to accept reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. To combat the ego, we must practice radical self-awareness. We must analyze our thoughts and actions with brutal honesty, asking ourselves, am I acting out of pride, or am I acting out of wisdom? Am I resisting growth because it challenges my identity? Am I letting my ego dictate my emotions, my reactions, my decisions? This requires humility, the willingness to admit when we are wrong, to embrace failure as a lesson, and to value truth over comfort. Humility does not mean self-deprecation. It does not mean thinking less of ourselves. It means recognizing our limitations, acknowledging our blind spots, and actively working to overcome them. It means seeking truth above all else, even when that truth is uncomfortable or difficult to accept. It is the ability to look at oneself objectively, without the need for external validation, without the compulsion to defend or justify, but simply to understand. Self-awareness requires courage, the courage to recognize our own arrogance, to dismantle the false stories we have built around ourselves, and to see ourselves as we truly are, not as we wish to be perceived. Only when we expose the ego's lies can we begin the process of eradicating its hold over us. It is a battle that must be fought daily with vigilance and discipline. We must starve the ego by rejecting the need for constant validation. We must embrace the discomfort of self-reflection. We must actively seek challenges, criticism, and feedback, using them as stepping stones toward mastery rather than as threats to our pride. The ego will resist. This is inevitable. It will fight to maintain its grip, convincing us that we are already wise, that we do not need to listen, that we do not need to change. And that is why we must be relentless in our pursuit of self-awareness. The moment we believe we have mastered ourselves, the ego will creep in again, whispering false reassurances, making us blind once more. Destroying the ego is not an event. It is a process, a lifelong journey of humility, discipline, and growth. Every day we must remind ourselves that we are students, not masters, that there is always more to learn, more to improve, more to refine. The moment we think we have arrived is the moment we have lost our way. And in that journey, we reclaim our power, the power over our minds, our emotions, and ultimately, our lives. True mastery does not come from control over others. It comes from control over ourselves. The more we let go of our ego, the more we gain. And in that letting go, we find something far greater than false pride. We find freedom. We discover an inner peace that is untouchable by external events, an unshakable clarity that allows us to move through life with wisdom rather than impulse, with calm rather than chaos. In surrendering the ego, we do not lose ourselves. We rediscover who we truly are. Take a moment each day to reflect on your thoughts. Ask yourself, am I making decisions based on how I want to be perceived rather than what is right? Am I avoiding the truth because it hurts my sense of self? Am I blaming others for things that I should take responsibility for? Write these reflections down. The more you become aware of your ego's tricks, the less power it has over you. Chapter 2. The Destructive Nature of Ego. Ego is not just a harmless voice in your head. It is destructive. It poisons your relationships, your ambitions, and your sense of self. It is the force that makes you take criticism personally, even when it is meant to help you. It makes you resent those who succeed instead of learning from them. It makes you feel entitled to success without putting in the necessary work. It creates a constant need for validation, pushing you to seek approval instead of focusing on real growth. It convinces you that your identity is tied to external achievements, leading to a fragile sense of self-worth that crumbles when faced with failure. It thrives on comparison, constantly measuring you against others and leading to feelings of superiority or deep insecurity. The more we indulge in ego, the more we lose control of our emotions, reacting instead of responding, defending instead of reflecting, resisting instead of learning. Consider the downfall of great leaders throughout history. How many kings, emperors, and rulers have lost their power because they let their ego override their reason? How many talented individuals have stagnated because they believed they already knew everything? Think of the artist who stops improving because they believe they have reached perfection. The executive who ignores good advice because they cannot admit they are wrong. The athlete who stops training hard because they assume their past victories guarantee future success. Ego has no allegiance to anyone. It will destroy anyone who allows it to take root, regardless of their intelligence, talent, or experience. The most brilliant minds have been sabotaged by their own refusal to accept growth. The most promising careers halted by the inability to acknowledge mistakes, and the most powerful rulers toppled by the illusion of invincibility. Ego does not discriminate. It undermines all who let it take hold. Ego is a silent killer. It destroys growth. It blinds us to our weaknesses. The moment we believe we have nothing left to learn, we stop growing. It convinces us that we are above correction, that we no longer need to seek improvement, that we have arrived at some pinnacle of achievement. This is the most dangerous mindset of all. Ego ensures that we become prisoners of our past successes, unable to move forward. It makes us defensive, unable to accept feedback. It forces us into a cycle of self-justification rather than self-examination. And in the end, it leaves us stagnant, bitter, and disconnected from the truth. When we let ego dictate our actions, we limit ourselves. We become trapped in an illusion of control, unable to recognize that the true mastery of life comes from adaptability, humility, and continuous evolution. The paradox of the ego is this: the more we seek to elevate ourselves through it, the more we sabotage our true potential. Ego thrives on the illusion of self-sufficiency, convincing us that we do not need to ask for help, that admitting weakness is an admission of failure. It tricks us into isolating ourselves from others, making us believe that vulnerability is dangerous rather than necessary. The Stoics recognized this deception and warned against it. Seneca once said, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." The ego thrives in times of success, whispering that we are untouchable, that we have figured everything out. But the true test of character comes in adversity, where humility and wisdom determine whether we rise or fall. The ego resists this truth, seeking to maintain the illusion of absolute control. The stronger its grip, the harder the eventual collapse. It is in these moments of struggle that we must actively dismantle the ego, piece by piece. We must acknowledge that we are perpetual students of life, that no one ever reaches the summit of wisdom, and that each challenge is an opportunity to refine our character. The person who clings to their ego is rigid, unyielding, unable to adapt when the world shifts around them. The person who is free from ego, however, remains flexible, open to learning, and resilient in the face of setbacks. A mind unburdened by ego is a mind that grows in strength and clarity. But the ego will not surrender without a fight. It will whisper doubts in our ears, convincing us that we are losing something valuable by letting it go. It will tempt us with illusions of superiority, pushing us toward validation and away from genuine growth. We must be vigilant, recognizing when the ego tries to reassert itself. This process is not a one-time event. It is a lifelong discipline, requiring constant self-reflection and awareness. The more we practice dismantling the ego, the more natural it becomes to live without its weight suffocating our progress. There is another way. If we learn to see ego for what it is, a self-imposed limitation, we can begin to undo its grip. Instead of being defensive, we can choose curiosity. Instead of craving validation, we can choose real improvement. Instead of avoiding discomfort, we can lean into it, knowing that true growth happens outside of comfort zones. We can remind ourselves that life is not a game of proving our worth to others, but rather an opportunity to improve ourselves, to sharpen our intellect, to refine our emotions, and to cultivate wisdom. Ego seeks to trap us in a performance, a never-ending attempt to impress and dominate. But true mastery lies in the opposite direction. It lies in surrendering the need to prove anything at all. When we let go of the ego's need to control and dominate, we find freedom in simply being, free to learn, free to adapt, free to evolve. Destroying the ego is not about becoming weak. It is about becoming stronger, wiser, and more in control of your own destiny. To conquer the ego, we must be willing to strip ourselves of illusions, to embrace discomfort, and to constantly remind ourselves that we are not above learning. The moment we believe we have mastered everything is the moment we have lost ourselves. True strength comes from knowing that growth is endless, and that the greatest freedom we can ever experience is the freedom from the ego's grasp. And in that freedom, we find peace. Not the fleeting peace of external validation, but the deep, unwavering peace of self-mastery. A life without ego is not a life of insignificance. Rather, it is a life of profound purpose, where we are no longer driven by insecurity, but by the desire to live wisely and well. If you want to kill your ego, you must be brutally honest with yourself. This is not a passive exercise, but an active confrontation with your deepest insecurities. Identify an area where your ego has held you back. Have you avoided feedback because it hurts? Have you dismissed advice because you think you know better? Have you found yourself resenting the success of others rather than learning from them? Have you refused to apologize when you were wrong, letting pride dictate your actions instead of wisdom? Write these reflections down. Honesty requires courage, and self-awareness demands continuous effort. Then, commit to changing it. Seek feedback not just from those who will comfort you, but from those who challenge you. Accept criticism with gratitude, even when it stings, for it is the sharpest tool for refining character. Remind yourself that every piece of feedback, every hard truth, and every moment of discomfort is a step closer to true mastery over yourself. The more you expose your ego, the weaker it becomes. Each time you let go of pride and replace it with humility, you reclaim a part of yourself, one that is open, adaptable, and infinitely capable of growth. Chapter 3. Detachment, the power of letting go. One of the greatest weapons against the ego is detachment. When you detach yourself from your emotions, your opinions, and your self-image, you take back control. The Stoics practiced this daily. They reminded themselves that their thoughts and emotions were not them. Instead of allowing feelings to dictate their actions, they observed them, questioned them, and ultimately learned to separate their identity from transient emotions. They understood that emotions, while real, are not always reliable guides to truth. Feelings rise and fall like waves, but wisdom remains steady. When we allow ourselves to be ruled by emotions, we give control over our actions to forces outside of ourselves. Epictetus said, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgment about things." What does this mean? It means that suffering is often self-inflicted. We are not disturbed by external events themselves, but by the way we choose to interpret them. The ego thrives on attachment to success, to validation, to personal narratives. We cling to our opinions, believing that to change our mind is to admit weakness. We attach ourselves to our status, fearing that any loss of recognition is a loss of identity. We resist change because the ego convinces us that we must always be right. But detachment is not about denying emotions or avoiding opinions. It is about creating space between ourselves and our reactions. When we detach, we give ourselves the ability to pause, to reflect, and to choose our response rather than being controlled by impulse. We can examine our thoughts without becoming entangled in them, just as a sailor observes the wind without being swept away by it. The key is not to suppress emotions, but to manage them with wisdom and intentionality. Detachment is not apathy, it is clarity. It is the ability to engage with life fully, without being enslaved by its ups and downs. Detachment does not mean indifference. Rather, it means that we do not allow external circumstances to dictate our inner state. Instead of reacting impulsively, we cultivate the ability to step back and view situations from a higher perspective. A person who has mastered detachment does not suppress their emotions, but understands them without being overwhelmed by them. They recognize that emotions are signals, not commands, and that they can acknowledge their feelings without allowing those feelings to control their actions. The power of detachment lies in its ability to bring wisdom to our decision-making. It allows us to navigate conflicts without losing our sense of inner peace. It helps us to accept criticism without defensiveness, to experience failure without despair, and to pursue success without arrogance. Detachment allows us to break free from the toxic cycles of emotional reactivity, where we constantly chase pleasure and flee discomfort. The Stoics understood this well. Only by removing our attachment to fleeting emotions and outcomes can we cultivate true resilience. A person who practices detachment does not ignore hardship, but faces it with an unshakable sense of calm, knowing that all experiences, both joyful and painful, are temporary. A person who has truly embraced detachment understands that nothing external can truly define them. They are not defined by praise nor diminished by criticism. Their self-worth is not tied to material success or social validation. They do not cling to their past nor fear the future. Instead, they remain grounded in the present, fully engaged but free from the emotional turbulence that ego-driven attachments create. They see setbacks as stepping stones rather than barriers, and they approach success with humility rather than entitlement. They do not measure their value by wealth, fame, or reputation, but by their ability to remain steadfast in their principles. This is the foundation of self-mastery, knowing that external events do not have power over us unless we give them that power. Detachment provides the strength to weather life's storms with equanimity, to adapt to change with grace, and to make decisions with clarity rather than emotion. To live detached is to live with greater purpose, intention, and freedom, guided not by fleeting passions, but by unshakable principles. It is a discipline that leads to true inner peace and an unshakable sense of self. It is a mindset that transforms obstacles into opportunities and hardships into lessons, allowing us to navigate life with wisdom, balance, and inner strength. Try this. The next time you feel anger, insecurity, or frustration, pause. Observe the emotion. Say to yourself, "This is just an emotion. It is not me. It will pass." This simple exercise creates a gap between you and your reactions, and in that gap, you take control. You regain the ability to respond with reason rather than impulse, to observe your emotions without being consumed by them. With practice, this small pause becomes a powerful tool, allowing you to recognize how fleeting and transient emotions truly are. That moment of separation between stimulus and response is where self-mastery begins. It is in that space where your true power lies, the power to remain composed, the power to act with intention, and the power to shape your destiny rather than being a slave to your emotions. The more you practice creating this gap, the greater control you will have over your own mind, leading to a life guided by wisdom rather than impulse, by clarity rather than chaos. Chapter 4. Humility, the antidote to ego. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking about yourself less. It is the understanding that you are one small piece in a vast universe, and that there is always more to learn. The moment you think you have arrived, you stop growing. The moment you believe you are the smartest person in the room, you have already lost. Humility is the foundation of wisdom because it opens the door to continuous learning, making room for growth, reflection, and a deeper understanding of both oneself and the world. True confidence is not built on ego but on self-awareness, on the knowledge that there is no shame in being a student for life. The humble person does not see themselves as inferior but as a work in progress, always refining, always improving. The Stoics practiced humility by constantly reminding themselves of their mortality. Seneca wrote, "You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire." What does this mean? That we waste time on arrogance and self-importance when we should be humbling ourselves before the shortness of life. The fleeting nature of existence should be a humbling realization, one that strips away the need for superiority or validation. Marcus Aurelius also reminded himself that even the greatest emperors are forgotten with time, buried beneath the dust of history. If the most powerful figures in history fade into obscurity, what makes us think that clinging to our ego will bring us anything more lasting? Our time here is limited, and the pursuit of vanity is one of the greatest distractions from meaningful growth. The more we dwell on our own importance, the more we delay our ability to contribute meaningfully to the world. Humility does not mean diminishing yourself, it means freeing yourself. It means unshackling yourself from the exhausting need to be right all the time, to appear impressive, or to feed the illusion of superiority. It allows you to live with ease, to learn from everyone around you, and to find contentment in progress rather than perfection. When you let go of the need to prove yourself, you open the door to true mastery, one that is not built on recognition, but on quiet, steady improvement. True humility allows us to understand that every experience, every interaction, and every setback is an opportunity to learn. The wisest people do not assert their superiority. They ask questions, listen, and embrace the possibility of being wrong. Humility removes the burden of expectation, allowing us to move through life with a sense of purpose rather than a need for validation. But humility is not an easy path. It requires constant self-awareness, a willingness to embrace discomfort, and the discipline to resist the ego's pull. It is a daily practice of setting aside pride and choosing growth over self-importance. It is the ability to celebrate others' success without resentment, to admit when we are wrong without hesitation, and to recognize that no single moment defines our worth. Humility keeps us from stagnating. It keeps us teachable, open to wisdom from unexpected sources, and free from the limitations of arrogance. It helps us understand that we are always in a state of becoming, never having truly arrived at perfection, but continuously striving toward excellence. To truly embrace humility, we must learn to detach our sense of self-worth from external validation. A humble person does not seek approval for the sake of ego, nor do they crumble in the face of criticism. They understand that all feedback, positive or negative, is simply information that can be used to grow. This mindset creates a level of resilience that allows us to thrive even in the most challenging circumstances. The humble person does not shrink away from difficulty. They lean into it, knowing that struggle is the price of mastery. They welcome discomfort, recognizing that stepping beyond their current limits is the only way to break through to new levels of understanding. Humility is the path to strength, resilience, and unshakable confidence, because when you are no longer bound by ego, you become truly free. You develop an inner stability that cannot be shaken by praise or criticism. You stop measuring yourself by external metrics and begin measuring yourself by the depth of your character. You no longer fear failure because you understand that learning and adaptation are the truest measures of success. You cultivate a mind that is flexible, open, and receptive to knowledge. You do not waste energy on defending your pride, but instead focus on refining your mind, deepening your understanding, and improving your actions. When humility becomes a practice, the mind becomes clear, the spirit becomes light, and life becomes an endless journey of growth rather than a competition for superiority. It allows us to move through life with grace, not needing to assert dominance or superiority, but rather seeking truth and wisdom above all else. The most powerful individuals are not those who demand respect, but those who command it through their quiet strength, their ability to listen, and their openness to learning. True mastery begins where the ego ends, and in that place you find something far greater than power. You find wisdom, peace, and the strength to navigate life with clarity and purpose. It is in humility that we discover the true essence of leadership, not through control or force, but through understanding and the ability to elevate those around us. Humility strips away the need for competition and comparison, leaving behind only the purest drive for self-betterment. It allows us to let go of past mistakes without guilt, to embrace the future without fear, and to engage with the present moment with a full heart and an open mind. In the end, humility is not just a trait. It is a way of life, a compass that guides us toward wisdom, integrity, and ultimate freedom. Each morning, remind yourself, you are not owed anything. You are not better than anyone else. You are here to learn, to grow, to serve. Humility is a daily practice. The more you embrace it, the less hold your ego has over you. Chapter 5. Mastering the Mind. Destroying the ego is not about making yourself weak. It is about making yourself strong enough to control your thoughts, your emotions, and your reactions. The ego thrives on impulse. It wants you to lash out when criticized, to indulge when tempted, to boast when praised. But when you master your mind, you become untouchable. Ego thrives in the space between thought and reaction, tricking us into believing that our immediate emotional responses are justified and necessary. It feeds on the illusion that we must always defend ourselves, that we must always seek validation, that we must always be seen as superior. But true strength is not found in reactive defensiveness. It is found in restraint, in discipline, in the ability to maintain complete control over our inner world despite the chaos of the external one. When you destroy the ego, you do not become passive. Rather, you become the master of your own energy, directing it with precision rather than scattering it aimlessly. The danger of ego is that it is an invisible prison. It chains us to our emotions, forcing us to react rather than respond. It keeps us locked in cycles of frustration, bitterness, and insecurity. The moment we allow it to dictate our actions, we become slaves to our impulses. But the person who has mastered their mind is not reactive. They are unshaken by fleeting emotions, unaffected by the noise of the world. They move through life with an unyielding presence, calm in adversity, focused in chaos, and unbothered by external distractions. This is the power that comes with detaching from the ego. Ego distorts reality. It tricks us into believing that external events are personal attacks, that every misstep is a catastrophe, that every criticism is a threat. It forces us into defensive patterns, convincing us that our self-worth is at stake with every disagreement or perceived slight. The mind that remains chained to the ego is a mind in constant turmoil, one that is restless, insecure, and fragile. However, the mind that is free from ego understands that adversity is a part of life, that setbacks are simply opportunities to adjust course, and that true strength comes from responding with wisdom rather than reacting with emotion. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The ultimate goal is not to let external circumstances dictate your inner world. The moment you master your thoughts, you become free. Freedom from ego does not mean indifference, nor does it mean disengagement. It means that no insult, no failure, no rejection has the power to shake your foundation. It means that you live with an inner fortitude that cannot be shattered by fleeting opinions or temporary misfortunes. It means that your self-worth is rooted in wisdom and discipline rather than in fragile external validations. To live without ego is to live without unnecessary suffering, without the weight of imaginary battles, without the constant need to prove oneself to others. It is the ability to walk away from meaningless conflicts, to focus on what truly matters, and to cultivate an unshakable sense of self. The process of mastering the mind begins with awareness of the ego's pull, awareness of the unnecessary emotional reactions it provokes, awareness of its constant hunger for validation. But awareness alone is not enough. Mastery requires practice. It requires daily discipline in choosing thought over impulse, reason over reaction, and control over chaos. It requires a commitment to observing emotions without being controlled by them, to pausing before responding, and to actively seeking the truth rather than defending the ego's illusions. Mastery is the practice of developing an inner dialogue that questions and challenges the ego's narratives rather than blindly accepting them. This is not an easy task. The ego resists being questioned, let alone dismantled. It thrives on certainty, on rigid identity, on false narratives that protect its dominance. It whispers, "You're already strong. You don't need to change. This is just who you are." But those who seek true mastery must be relentless in their self-examination. They must confront their own biases, their need for validation, their impulse to react defensively. They must be willing to deconstruct the illusions they have built about themselves and be prepared to start anew when necessary. It is in this practice that we find true power, the kind that cannot be taken away by anything external. True power is not in proving yourself to others, but in being so deeply rooted in who you are that no external force can shake you. It is the ability to walk through life with a quiet confidence, with the knowledge that your worth is not dictated by the approval or rejection of others. It is the discipline to resist the pull of external validation and instead cultivate inner certainty. The strong individual does not need to shout their strength to the world. They embody it in their actions, in their restraint, in their unshakable ability to think and act independently. As we continue to practice mastery, we begin to see that control is not about dominance over others, but about mastery over ourselves. It is about being able to choose our responses rather than being led by impulse. It is about being deliberate rather than reactive. It is about being able to endure discomfort without losing balance, about facing hardship without succumbing to despair, about accepting uncertainty without fear. This kind of strength does not erode under pressure, it grows. And it is in this mastery of self, in this ability to move through life with wisdom and control, that we find something greater than fleeting validation. We find peace, freedom, and an unshakable sense of self. This is not an easy path, but it is the only path to true strength, the kind that endures, the kind that cannot be broken by the shifting tides of fortune or the opinions of others. The moment we relinquish the need to prove our worth, the moment we stop clinging to the ego's desperate need to be right, to be superior, to be validated, we experience a liberation unlike any other. We become free, and in that freedom, we find true power. Every time you feel an emotional reaction rising, stop. Ask yourself, is this my ego speaking? If the answer is yes, let it go. Respond with reason, not emotion. The more you practice, the stronger you become. Chapter 6. The Illusion of Control. The ego deceives us into believing that we can control everything around us. How people perceive us, how situations unfold, and even how others behave. But this is an illusion. The more we try to control external circumstances, the more we suffer. The Stoics knew this well. They taught that the only thing we truly control is our own mind, our reactions, and our decisions. Everything else is outside our grasp. Epictetus wrote, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." Yet the ego rebels against this truth. It wants to dictate outcomes, to force reality to conform to its expectations. This is why ego-driven individuals are so often frustrated. They are in a constant battle with forces beyond their control. They cling to expectations and resent the world when it does not align with their desires. True mastery begins when we surrender this illusion of control. Instead of trying to manipulate the world, we shift our focus inward. We take responsibility for our thoughts, emotions, and actions. We let go of attachment to results and instead focus on doing what is right, moment by moment. When we free ourselves from the burden of controlling what is uncontrollable, we find peace. We become adaptable, resilient, and unshaken by the inevitable challenges of life. The next time you feel frustrated, ask yourself, am I trying to control something that is not mine to control? Remind yourself that your power lies in your response, not in the outcome. Practice focusing only on what is within your control, your thoughts, choices, and actions. Chapter 7. Replacing arrogance with curiosity. Ego thrives on certainty. It wants to believe that it already knows everything, that it has nothing left to learn. But certainty is a trap. The moment we believe we have all the answers, we stop seeking new ones. We stop growing. The mind that is convinced of its own superiority becomes stagnant, closed off to new insights, and unwilling to accept that truth is often far more complex than we initially perceive. The wisest individuals are not those who claim to have mastered everything. They are those who remain perpetual students of life. They replace arrogance with curiosity. They embrace the unknown with a desire to learn rather than a need to prove themselves. Socrates, one of the great philosophers of history, famously stated, "I know that I know nothing." This was not an admission of ignorance, but of wisdom. He understood that true knowledge comes from questioning, from being open to new perspectives, and from admitting when we are wrong. The ability to acknowledge one's own ignorance is a mark of intellectual strength, not weakness. Curiosity is the foundation of a mind that is ever expanding. It is the gateway to deeper wisdom, new perspectives, and untapped potential. Those who assume they have all the answers block themselves from growth, while those who question their assumptions open endless doors to learning. The greatest innovators, leaders, and thinkers in history were not those who clung stubbornly to their beliefs, but those who dared to ask, what if there's more to this? Curiosity is the fuel of transformation, the force that drives self-improvement and adaptation. If we want to destroy our ego, we must cultivate curiosity. We must become comfortable saying, I don't know. We must be willing to ask questions, to challenge our own assumptions, and to embrace the possibility that we might be wrong. This is not weakness, it is strength. The person who is willing to learn will always surpass the person who clings to their own perceived superiority. Learning is not about appearing intelligent in the eyes of others. It is about deepening our understanding of ourselves and the world. When we prioritize curiosity over the need to be right, we make room for transformation, personal growth, and wisdom that can only come from truly listening, observing, and adapting. A curious mind does not fear uncertainty, it thrives in it, finding new paths, uncovering deeper truths, and realizing that knowledge is a lifelong pursuit rather than a destination. Curiosity is a gateway to innovation, wisdom, and emotional resilience. It is the antidote to the rigidity of ego. When we remain curious, we are no longer bound by the limitations of our current knowledge. We see every challenge, every failure, and every disagreement as an opportunity to refine our thinking rather than as a threat to our identity. The ego fears being wrong, but a curious mind thrives in uncertainty, understanding that growth only happens when we dare to question everything, even ourselves. The destruction of ego is not about diminishing the self, it is about expanding it, allowing it to evolve beyond its current limitations. Those who embrace curiosity walk the path of mastery, while those who cling to certainty remain trapped in the illusion of their own superiority. The greatest thinkers, the most successful individuals, and the most adaptable minds are those who continually seek knowledge, who remain humble in their quest for understanding. They do not close themselves off from new information or perspectives simply because they challenge what they previously believed. Instead, they welcome growth. They ask, what else is there to learn? What am I not seeing? What can I take from this experience that will help me improve? In contrast, the ego-driven mind resists change. It fears that new insights will dismantle the carefully constructed identity it has built. It avoids admitting faults, clings to past victories, and views questioning as weakness rather than strength. But true strength comes from being flexible in mind, from acknowledging that we will always be students of life. We must remind ourselves daily that we have never arrived at complete knowledge. There is always more to explore, always more to understand, always another layer to uncover. The journey of self-mastery is one of constant refinement, and curiosity is the tool that sharpens our minds, allowing us to cut through the illusions that ego creates. Those who dare to question themselves, who are unafraid of being wrong, and who seek truth over validation, will find themselves continuously growing, continuously evolving, and ultimately free from the chains of arrogance. A curious mind is not easily defeated because it does not see failure as an endpoint. It sees setbacks as lessons, criticism as valuable feedback, and challenges as stepping stones to wisdom. While ego clings desperately to past achievements and fears change, curiosity embraces change as the very essence of growth. A life fueled by curiosity is a life without limits. It is a life in which every experience, good or bad, becomes an opportunity to learn, to evolve, and to refine our understanding of ourselves and the world. The ego creates walls around the mind, keeping it locked in rigid beliefs and outdated assumptions. But curiosity breaks those walls down, allowing us to move freely, to adapt, and to see beyond what we thought possible. It replaces defensiveness with openness, arrogance with humility, and stagnation with progress. The moment we embrace curiosity, we commit ourselves to a lifelong pursuit of truth, wisdom, and mastery over the one thing that truly matters, our own mind. Challenge your own beliefs daily. Ask yourself, could I be wrong about this? Seek out people who think differently from you. Listen to understand, not to respond. Approach every experience as an opportunity to learn rather than to prove yourself. Chapter 8. The Power of Stillness. A mind ruled by ego is constantly restless. It seeks validation, attention, and distraction. It cannot sit still because stillness forces it to confront itself. The ego thrives on movement, on noise, on the illusion that busyness equates to progress. But the path to mastering the mind requires stillness. Only in stillness can we observe our thoughts without judgment, recognize our patterns, and cultivate clarity. It is in silence that we strip away the layers of identity we have built and face ourselves as we truly are, without embellishment, without pretense, without the distractions that allow us to avoid introspection. Marcus Aurelius practiced stillness through reflection and meditation. He wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." This is the ultimate power, to be at peace within oneself, regardless of external circumstances. When we practice stillness, we create space between ourselves and our emotions. We gain the ability to respond to life with wisdom rather than impulse. We begin to see how much of our suffering is self-created, how much of our stress is fueled by unnecessary attachment, and how often we let external events dictate our inner state. Stillness allows us to take back that control. Stillness is not just about physical silence. It is about training the mind to be calm, even in chaos. It is about developing the ability to observe without reacting, to listen without immediately forming judgments, and to think before acting. It teaches us patience, self-control, and the power of deliberate thought. In a world that glorifies constant activity, stillness is an act of rebellion, one that grants us mastery over ourselves. The deeper we go into stillness, the more we realize that clarity and wisdom are not found in relentless motion, but in quiet observation. A still mind is a powerful mind, immune to the distractions and manipulations of the ego. Set aside time each day for silence. No phone, no distractions, just stillness. When faced with a strong emotion, pause, breathe. Observe the feeling before responding. Make reflection a daily practice. Ask yourself, what did I learn today? How did my ego try to take control? Chapter 9. Embracing discomfort. Ego seeks comfort. It wants us to avoid struggle, to stay within our familiar patterns, to resist change. But true growth only happens when we step outside of comfort and into challenge. The greatest transformations occur when we willingly place ourselves in situations that demand more from us. When we refuse to challenge ourselves, we stagnate. We remain confined within the limitations of our comfort zones, falsely believing that safety equals progress. But in truth, real strength is built in adversity, in the moments where we push past our limits and face discomfort head-on. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort to strengthen their minds. They would expose themselves to hardship, not out of self-punishment, but to build resilience. Seneca would sleep on the floor to remind himself that luxury is not necessary for happiness. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself daily that difficulties were not obstacles but opportunities to practice virtue. Epictetus, born into slavery, developed an indomitable mind by enduring hardship without complaint. He understood that suffering was not to be feared, but rather a teacher that could shape one's character. They saw discomfort not as something to avoid, but as an essential tool for training the mind, sharpening self-discipline, and cultivating inner peace. When we embrace discomfort, we weaken the ego's grip on us. We stop seeing struggle as a threat and start seeing it as a tool. We realize that hardship is not something to fear, but something to use. We begin to understand that the greatest obstacles in life are not external ones, but the internal resistance we create when we avoid challenges. The ego wants to stay in familiar territory where it feels in control, but true self-mastery requires us to lean into difficulty, to willingly take on discomfort so that we may transcend our limitations. It is only through hardship that we can truly know our strength, and only through challenge that we can become unbreakable. Do something uncomfortable every day. Take a cold shower, speak up when you are afraid, push yourself beyond your usual limits. When facing a challenge, reframe it. Instead of thinking, "This is too hard," ask, "What can I learn from this?" Develop the habit of leaning into difficulty rather than avoiding it. Chapter 10. The true meaning of strength. Many believe that strength is about dominance, about overpowering others, about never showing vulnerability. But this is an illusion created by the ego. True strength is not about control over others, it is about control over oneself. It is about the ability to remain steady in a world that constantly seeks to pull us into conflict, insecurity, and chaos. True strength is measured not by physical force, but by mental resilience, by the capacity to endure adversity without breaking, and by the wisdom to choose discipline over impulse. The strongest people are not those who impose their will on the world, but those who can remain composed in adversity. The strongest person is the one who does not allow anger to control them, who does not allow fear to dictate their choices, who does not need external validation to feel whole. They recognize that strength is not in forcing others to bend to their will, but in maintaining their own integrity in the face of pressure. This is the kind of strength that cannot be taken away. It does not fade with time. It is the strength of discipline, of wisdom, of an unwavering sense of self. The person who possesses this strength is not reactive, but deliberate. They do not rush to prove their power, because they understand that true strength is demonstrated in restraint, in the ability to rise above ego-driven conflicts and focus on what truly matters. When we destroy our ego, we do not become weak. We become truly powerful. We become free from the chains of insecurity, from the exhausting pursuit of validation, from the need to constantly prove ourselves. We no longer feel the urge to react to every slight, to compete with every rival, to impress every audience. Instead, we cultivate an unshakable inner foundation. We develop the ability to stand firm in the storm, to remain steady when the world is unstable, and to choose wisdom over fleeting emotions. True strength is not found in dominance, but in understanding. It is not in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. The strongest individuals are those who possess the quiet confidence that comes from self-awareness, from patience, from the ability to endure suffering without letting it define them. And in that, we find the ultimate victory over the enemy within, the ego itself. Strength is not aggression, it is control. Train yourself to remain composed in all situations. Strength is not avoiding vulnerability, it is embracing it. Be honest about your fears and weaknesses. Strength is not seeking validation. It is being secure in who you are without needing approval. Destroying your ego is not a one-time event. It is a lifelong practice. Every day, we must choose humility over arrogance, wisdom over impulse, and discipline over comfort. We must remind ourselves that the battle is never over, but that every step we take toward mastering our mind is a step toward true freedom. The greatest power you will ever attain is not control over others, but control over yourself, and that power is available to you right now. The question is, will you take it?